It is appropriate to applaud, however, when we welcome each candidate onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Corey Stewart.
Thanks, Mark. My pleasure.
It's good to see you again.
It's great to be here again.
We actually interviewed with each other several weeks ago, so this is our second time in the last month or so.
Yeah, we planned the whole thing out ahead of time. That's a joke.
All right, we've got some important issues to get to. The nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court is under fire, as you know. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford alleges that Kavanaugh sexually assaulted her nearly 40 years ago. You've called the allegation a bunch of crap. The president said, "It's very hard for me to imagine anything happened between the pair." You say Democrats are just trying to derail his nomination for a political gain. But what's your message to women voters, especially in this Me Too era?
Well, thank you. And first of all, I'd like to thank the university for hosting this event yet again. And thank you, Mark. Look, how many times have we been through this? In the 11th hour, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or a liberal or a conservative, that all this time goes by, and then on the week that the Senate Judiciary Committee is set to vote, then this comes up. I just find the timing highly suspect, and I'm not the only one, obviously. I think most of you do too. And then you've got Senator Feinstein. She knew about this weeks ago. Why didn't she come out with it back then? Why did Senator Feinstein not, inform the FBI or other law enforcement officials? Why did she do nothing? Why did she sit on this allegation until the week that the Judiciary Committee was set to vote on it? I just find it, and frankly, it's become very typical of the left to do this at the 11th hour in a very dirty trick to try to take down a very good man who even the dean of Yale Law School, not exactly a conservative, who is said is an eminent scholar, an eminent lawyer, an eminent judge, and somebody who is eminently qualified for the United States Supreme Court. Should the FBI do an investigation? I think it's time to vote. I think it's the time. I think Americans are frustrated with all of these. It's become a circus up there. They're tired of Republicans and Democrats bickering these dirty tricks at the latest hour. They just want an up or down vote. Americans want to move on. Along the lines of the court, with Judge Kavanaugh, if he makes it through this process, there is some thinking that Roe v. Wade could be gone by the wayside. Is that something you would like to see happen? Yes, I would. And I'll tell you why. It was wrongly decided. There is, and at this point, now let me just say this. Earlier this year, Senator Kaine, who, when he was running for governor, I don't know what happened to him in the meantime, but when he was running for governor, he said there was a moral imperative to limit abortions in the final term, to limit abortions in the late term. But suddenly he runs for vice president, and then something happened. And now Senator Kaine wouldn't even vote for a bill, the pain-capable bill at the early part of this year, to limit abortions up to the 9th month of pregnancy. Senator Kaine knows it's wrong, but for political expedience, he's willing to allow abortions right up to the moment of birth. I find that morally reprehensible. And in one of our jobs, in fact, the most important jobs that we have, whether we're representing the people on a local or a state or a federal level, is to protect the lives and the rights of the citizens we serve. The Mueller probe is looking into Russian interference in the 2016 election. The president calls it a witch hunt, so have you. You're for ending this investigation that's already led to 5 people connected to Donald Trump pleading guilty to federal charges and a number of indictments, including more than 24 Russians. Why end it? You know, if you're really looking for voter fraud, if you're looking for people who have tried to influence the elections, why don't we have the Department of Justice go look into some of these precincts where there were more votes than voters? Why don't we look at that? If you're looking for, corruption in our voting system, we have some of it going on right here in Virginia. Yes, we require a voter ID when you go to vote, but we don't require proof of citizenship when you go to register your vote. And that's a massive loophole. And every vote by somebody who is not authorized to vote, by somebody who's not a citizen, or somebody who's not 18 years old, every single time somebody votes twice or is not authorized to vote, or somebody who's here illegally and they vote, that's a vote stolen from an American citizen. And that's a much bigger problem than all of these unsubstantiated claims about what the Russians did. But the Russians have been spying on us since 1917.
You know that a number of intelligence agencies say that they were involved.
Yes, but not a single intelligence agency or any law enforcement agency in the federal, state, or local government has ever said that the Russians actually had an impact on the national election.
The Census Bureau's annual report on income and poverty shows that among those who hold bachelor's degrees, about 3.6 million, or 4.8%, were living in poverty in 2017. That's up from 3.3 million in 2016. Bachelor's degree recipients were the only educational group to see the number or the share of people in poverty rise among their ranks. How do you reverse that trend for college grads here in Virginia? A number of these people want to hear about that.
Yeah, I do too, and I want to make some changes here. Because, you know, we have a problem with debt. You know, you can go through, now Liberty's a great university, and Liberty's got a very excellent track record of making sure that their graduates have jobs in the fields in which they studied. But not all colleges and universities can say that. And it's not just the amount of money, it's not just the student debt that these students are facing after they graduate. It's something that nobody can ever give back to them, and that's your time. You spend the time, the prime of your lives, studying, and when you get out of the school, and for many of these schools, you can't find a job, or you can't find a job in the field that you were trained in and received your education. There is a way to fix this. And that is, since the early 1970s, the United States Department of Education has been in charge of accreditation. In other words, if you want to go to a university or a college and get a student loan or a student or a federal grant, that university or that school needs to be accredited. It's time to take that power away from the federal government and give it back to the states. And here's why. The states are better positioned to work together with industry, with business associations, with chambers of commerce. What is it? And ask them, work together with them. What is it that the workforce needs? What is it? What is the training? What is the education that you need as a business? And only by doing that and accrediting specific courses can we be insured as students, can they be insured that they will have a job waiting for them once they graduate from the institution of higher learning.
You say that every illegal immigrant should be deported, no questions asked, and that if you're elected, you'll oppose any form of amnesty. There are roughly 12 million illegal immigrants in the country, and data suggests that many have been here for 10 years or more. You're in favor of a merit-based immigration policy. If you get the chance to sponsor such a bill, what would it look like?
Well, it'd be very simple. We need to base our immigration system, again, as we once did, on merit. In other words, if you want to come to the United States, we welcome you. You can't have a criminal background. You need to be able to support yourselves and your families. And you need to be able to become a full-fledged, proud American. And right now what we have is this. We have chaos at the border. And people coming across the border. And here's the big problem with that. We have no way of screening them, let alone for a terrorist past. We have no way of making sure that they don't have a criminal past. And many of them do. And they come across the border illegally, and they already have a criminal past, and they come into our communities, and they murder, and they assault. Right here in Virginia, there are many, many examples of that. The latest example, of course, the most famous or infamous example up in Iowa with Molly Tibbetts, murdered by an illegal immigrant. Now, here's the real tragedy about that. It was 100% preventable. Now, what I've done on the local level is this. We target the illegal immigrants who are here committing crimes. We check everybody's immigration status once they're arrested. If you're arrested, we check your immigration status. We don't care what race you are. We don't care what language you speak, what your ethnicity is. And if you're here illegally and you've committed a crime, We have you deported instead of being released. That's how we get started, is the 287G authority. It's saved lots of lives in Prince William County. So far, it's led to the deportation of 8,000 criminal illegal aliens in Prince William County alone. That's what we need in all of Virginia. That's what we need across the country.
You've been critical of gun-free zones in schools. You believe all schools should have armed guards, whether they are school resource officers or retired police officers, and that the federal government should help defray the cost. You also support letting teachers carry concealed weapons if they receive training. What do you say to those voters who believe it's a bad idea on a number of levels to arm teachers?
You know what's a bad idea? The system we have in place right now. Have you ever asked yourself, why is it that we use guns to protect our money? Have you ever seen a gun-free zone in front of a bank? Think of how ridiculous that is. So why is it any better that we're protecting our kids with signs? We're protecting our money with guns, and we're protecting our kids with signs. You know what a gun-free zone is? A gun-free zone sign is? It's an invitation. It's an invitation to the killer because they know that's a soft target to this coward who can go in there and just shoot the place up and not have to worry about being confronted by another gunman. What we need is what we did in Prince William County. I get things done. That's my job as a local official. That's what I'm going to do in the United States Senate. And after the Sandy Hook massacre, we've 95 schools in Prince William County now. We put armed SROs, or school resource officers, who, by the way, work together with the students on discipline issues and help to build trust between the police and the students. And what I would like to do, and what we're doing, we're the first in Virginia, is making that all over to all of our schools with retired police officers. Not all communities can afford it. That's where the federal government should come in and make sure that all of our kids are safe, regardless of the community that they live in.
All right, very good. Corey Stewart. Time for us to take a real quick break. When we return, Liberty University students will have a chance to ask questions directly to Mr. Stewart.
Welcome back. It is now time for our students here at Liberty University to pose their questions directly to Mr. Stewart. Corey, I hope you're ready for some tough questions. Let's get to it right now. I'm going to call out the name and the topic. Tim Mersick is a junior from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and the topic is your candidacy.
Hi, Mr. Stewart. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you being here to answer our questions. My name's Tim, and I'm the president of the College Republicans here at Liberty University. In my experience and with those in my generation, I found that many Republicans are hesitant about your candidacy and your rhetoric, and polling has shown you down significantly to Senator Kaine. With this in mind, how do you plan to win hesitant Republicans over, as you will need our support to secure this election?
Great. Thanks a lot, Tim. Appreciate it. So, you know, there's something that not everybody knows, and that is I'm currently elected. And not just in a solidly conservative part of the state. I'm in Northern Virginia. I'm the at-large chairman of the Board of Supervisors for Prince William County. It's almost 500,000 people. It's the first majority-minority county in Northern Virginia, and I've been elected there and re-elected there among almost 500,000 people 4 times, countywide. And I've done that because I've been able to work together across party lines. I've been able to work together with people of all different backgrounds. And at the end of the day, that's what people want. Now, I'm not afraid to stand up for my values, and I got very strong values. I saw, for example, what was happening on illegal immigration with crimes committed against citizens in my community, and I did something about it. And I had to stir things up, but I also got something done. And that's what I want to do in the United States Senate. And it's okay that we have differences, that's fine. But at the end of the day, I think we can agree on this, that we have a lot in common as well. And not just among Republicans, but with Democrats as well. And a lot of these problems, and in Washington, right now, it's broken. People aren't talking to each other. Republicans aren't talking to Democrats. Democrats aren't talking to Republicans. We've got 2 completely different sides of the media. We've got CNN and MSNBC over here and Fox News over there. We've become a divided country. We don't all have to think alike. We don't all have to moderate. We don't all have to come down to the same things. But we can focus and concentrate on the things that we get done together, the common things that we can accomplish.
All right, next up is Nathan Copeland, a first-year law student from Circleville, Ohio. The topic, the national debt.
Mr. Stewart, thank you so much for being here. My question is, would you vote for a spending bill that increased the national debt in the Senate?
Okay, thanks a lot. So we have to address the national debt, but to get there, there's a couple things we have to acknowledge. One is this. What President Reagan acknowledged back in the 1980s is we had to lower taxes in the 1980s in order to have that economic growth. So it is possible to grow your way out of debt by becoming a more wealthy country. And a lot on the left have criticized the tax cut that was proposed by President Trump and that was put into place by the Republicans in the Senate and Republicans in the House. And yes, in the short term, there was an increase to the deficit. But what this has led to now is the highest rate of economic growth in decades. We have the lowest unemployment rate in this country, and we're only 8 months in to this tax cut. And already we have the lowest unemployment rate in 52 years. Wages for working class, blue-collar Americans are rising at the fastest rate in 22 years. And this is because even CNN has acknowledged this is because of the Trump tax cut. So yes, you can go into the short term, not in the long term. In the short term, you reduce taxes, and that actually makes the economy start rolling as it is right now. We're seeing growth rates that we haven't seen in this country since before the 1950s. As that continues, we will continue to grow, and that debt will become more affordable to our nation.
If I may ask real quickly about that, certainly a lot of economic progress, but are you concerned about even the White House Office of Management and Budget has revised the numbers on this upward in terms of our debt?
The problem in our country isn't that our taxes aren't high enough. The problem in our country is that we're spending too much. And we have Republicans and Democrats spending way too much, and they're not willing to tackle the things that are driving this deficit. An unreformed Medicaid system developed in 1965 that is breaking the budgets not just of the federal government, but of the state governments as well. And as that happens, we are pushing out and crowding out funding for everything else, including education, including transportation. These things need to be addressed. They're going to be tough. But if we can do it together, if we can work together as Republicans and Democrats and put the politics aside and say, look, let's reform the Medicaid system, let's make it a better system for the people who are on it, and let's lower the cost for the federal and the state governments and the taxpayers, we're going to be able to address the national debt, but at the same time improve the quality of health care in this country.
All right, let's get to Emily Turner from Fort Bragg, North Carolina, a senior, and her question is on LGBTQ rights. We are kind of running out of time, about 5 minutes, so we want to pick it up.
Thank you again for joining us, Mr. Stewart. According to a Pew Research study, 61% of young Republicans support LGBTQ rights. How do we balance religious liberty while respecting and avoiding discriminating people for their identity?
And we can hear you. We can hear you right there.
Okay. So you got to remember what our Constitution does. Our Constitution prevents the federal government and now by extension the state government from discriminating against its citizens. And the thing that is, think about our rights in this country. They're listed in the Bill of Rights. And first and foremost, and the founders placed these in order. And in the First Amendment is not just the freedom of speech and expression, but they also knew that it was fundamental to a democratic form of government, to a republic, was freedom of religion. And you might not like it if somebody treats you a little bit differently because of your beliefs and your sexual orientation. But as long as it's not the government that is doing it, we cannot ensure that we're going to infringe on somebody's religious beliefs and force them to provide someone a service simply because of your sexual orientation. That we have to stay true to our Constitution.
Jairus Truss is a senior from Woodbridge, Virginia.
Hey, Jairus.
Communications Pastoral Leadership major, and your question is on minority support.
Yes. So my question is, how do you plan to gain the support and protect the American rights for minorities, especially after events that happened, like in Charlottesville, Virginia, and continuing with Woodbridge as well?
Okay, well, good to see you. Yeah. So you're from Woodbridge or Lake Ridge, or?
Yeah, Woodbridge.
Okay, well, nice to meet you. So, you know, I believe in talking to the other side. And yesterday there was another forum, the Radio 1 Richmond. It was a minority event. And I know that many Democrats were there, and they didn't expect that I would say yes. They knew that I would probably face a crowd that would have some tough questions for me. And they did. But I went there because I think that that's what we need to do. We have to talk with one another. And next week, I've accepted an invitation to appear in front of the NAACP of Fairfax County. I know they're going to have some tough questions for me. But that's okay, because we're yelling at each other in this country. You don't have to have the same beliefs, but we have to be able to talk to one another. That's what I'm going to do. I've been able to get things done because of this. I've been able to work with the other sides. And I know that when I go to the NAACP in Fairfax, this is going to be a very important moment, because I want to let them know that even if we have differences, we have a lot more in common, and we can work together.
Okay, I believe that's going to be our last question. We knew the time was going to go by very quickly, so now you do get 1 full minute to make your closing remarks, and I will let you do that now.
Okay, I don't need that. Okay, thanks. Well, I just want to thank again the university. I want to thank each and every one of you. I want to thank all of Virginia, and I want to thank all those who voted for me in the primary for giving me this opportunity to represent all of Virginia. I've got very strong beliefs, and I'm not afraid to express them. I think you all know that. But I can also get things done. And what I see in Washington, I see two sides that are not willing to work together. I see two sides that are bickering. I see one side, I see the Democrats saying, well, we'd like to get things accomplished, but the Republicans won't let us. And then I hear the Republicans saying the same things. They'd like to get something done, but the Democrats won't let us. You know, as a local person, somebody who's had to represent a big jurisdiction, if I had that same attitude, I would have been fired. I'm going up to Washington not because I want to keep it the same, as Senator Kaine does, but because I want to change it, because I want to rile things up. Yes, I do. But I also want to get things accomplished, and I'm willing to work together with the other side to do that. And I ask for your vote on November 6th. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so very much for being here. Thank you. Corey Stewart, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thanks a lot.
Our town hall continues now with the man who wants to keep his seat in the Senate. Everyone welcome Senator Tim Kaine to the stage.
That was a fast 30 minutes.
Right here. Enthusiastic supporters. Let's talk about Judge Brett Kavanaugh. You met him. You said you diligently studied his record of academic writings and judicial opinions, and yet you determined he cannot be counted on to serve as an independent check on the president, and you're not voting for him. Well, now we have an allegation of sexual assault from nearly 40 years ago. What more needs to happen before the Senate votes on this lifetime appointment?
Mark, first, thanks to Liberty for hosting this. It's nice to be back. I was last with you on Veterans Day when Liberty hosted the Lynchburg Veterans Day Parade. This is a really important one. And I think what's important is that a serious charge has been leveled, and it's a charge that is essentially a sexual assault, even could be construed as an attempted rape, and we ought to get to the bottom of it. This is a vacancy that just opened up on July 31st. That's when Justice Kennedy retired. We're 7 weeks into this. The GOP majority held a vacancy open for 14 months for political reasons. If we care about sexual assault, if we think that it's serious, then we should do everything to get to the bottom of this. And that would obviously involve hearing from Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh, clearly. But it would also involve hearing from witnesses. There are a couple of witnesses who have been identified. One, Mark Judge, who the allegation says was in the room when this happened. Why wouldn't we want to hear from these witnesses? And why wouldn't the FBI's already done a background investigation? Why wouldn't they reopen it to look at this particular charge? We should take the time to get this right. And in this, I differ from my opponent. My opponent called the allegations, quote, a bunch of crap. My opponent tweeted out that what's next? Somebody will say Judge Kavanaugh pulled the pigtails of a first grader. Can I make this very plain to you? You cannot equate pulling the pigtail of a first grader with two 17-year-olds allegedly barricading a 15-year-old in the room and sexually assaulting her. You cannot minimize this charge. There is a charge, and there's enough corroboration to it that she sought counseling many years ago, that she took a lie detector test and passed it, that the witness alleged in the room, Mark Judge, is somebody who's written about a history of blackout drinking and partying when he was in high school. We've got to get to the bottom of it. There's no reason to rush a Supreme Court nominee through. Are you concerned with the Judge Kavanaugh on the High Court that Roe v. Wade is in jeopardy? I am. I'm concerned about that and other precedent as well. When I interviewed Judge Kavanaugh, when he testified, and I'd read many of his opinions, he said Roe versus Wade was settled law. But when we finally got documents from the White House, he said, well, look, settled law is only settled until the Supreme Court says otherwise. There's 3 people on the Supreme Court now who want to overturn it. What would overturning Roe versus Wade mean? That is what my opponent wants to do. He says, I want to overturn Roe versus Wade. What would that mean? It would mean we'd go back to what the law was before, that the state could use the criminal law to criminalize, prosecute, and jail women for making their own reproductive health care decisions. That's what it means to overturn Roe versus Wade, and I don't think that's what we should do in this country. It's an important moral issue, obviously, but I think women can make their own moral decisions about their health care, including reproductive health care.
The Mueller probe. The president declassified a portion of materials used to obtain a secret warrant to monitor the communication of his former campaign foreign policy advisor, Carter Page. He said it was for transparency. You want to protect Robert Mueller and his investigation with legislation. Why is that level of protection needed? After all, this investigation has already cost the American taxpayers roughly $26 million.
It's important to protect the integrity of our elections. That's why we need to protect the investigation. There have already been over 30 indictments and guilty pleas of individuals as part of this investigation. So my opponent says it's a witch hunt. My opponent says it should be terminated. But this is an investigation into extremely serious allegations, and the guilty pleas and the indictments thus far have demonstrated it. So I think what we need to do is protect the investigation and let it complete. And when all the facts are out on the table, we will know, A, if individuals are culpable and should be indicted or charged, but B, probably the most important thing that we need to know, Mark, is how to stop a foreign adversary from ever doing this again. When I was on the ticket in 2016, my son was deployed as a U.S. Marine infantry commander on the border with Russia, trying to protect our allies from Russian interference. Why would we deploy our young people halfway around the world to protect our allies, but then suggest that we're uninterested in getting to the bottom of what Russia did to our election system?
You voted against the Republican tax plans, saying the Senate let down the people we serve and that Americans will be stuck with the painful consequences for years to come. But the economy is booming, and the White House said Americans have the 2016 election to thank for that. The president tweeted recently that the GDP is at 4.2%, and we will do much better than this. We have just begun. Were you wrong?
No, Mark, look, I'm glad that the American economy is strong, that's for sure. But of course, the economy performed better in the last 18 months of President Obama's term than it did in the first 18 months of President Obama's. Now, President Trump hasn't mind taking advantage of inherited wealth before, and I think he's sort of taking advantage of it now. Here's why I voted against the tax bill.
Ladies and gentlemen.
Here's why I voted against the tax bill. Was the president right? Did we need to do tax reform? Absolutely. Haven't done it since 1986. Last time we did it, President Reagan said, we're going to do it. We're going to take the time to get it right. We're going to make it bipartisan. 10 months of hearings produced a 97-3 vote, and it was a good reform, and we needed to do it. But here's the problem with this bill, and the reason I voted against it. The priorities were all wrong. Deep, permanent tax cuts for corporations, tiny, temporary, expiring tax cuts for people, add $2 trillion to the debt over 10 years. I offered an amendment on the floor the evening that they let us offer 1-minute amendments after handing us the 800-page tax bill to make the individual tax cuts permanent, but not drop the corporate tax rate. So far, no Republicans would vote it. We should have a tax code that treats workers and people as well as corporations.
Health care, the Affordable Care Act. Senator Kaine, you voted against repeal and replace, the partial repeal and the so-called skinny repeal. The president calls Democrats like yourself obstructionists. Are you one? And you and Senator Michael Bennet are pushing something called Medicare X. Mm-hmm. You say it won't increase taxes by a penny, it won't increase the deficit. Some would say, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. How is all this going to work?
Let me talk about both halves of the question. I proudly worked with my Democratic colleagues and 3 Republicans and Virginians to stop the Republican effort to repeal the Affordable Care Act. It would have taken health insurance away. The CBO estimate was between 20 and 30 million people. It would have blocked our General Assembly from just doing the Medicaid expansion, whereby 400,000 Virginians are going to get health care, many for the first time in their life. And I was very proud to vote against that repeal because I had Virginians flooding my office and talking to me about the fact that absent some of these Medicaid funds, their child wouldn't have a wheelchair to be able to go to school with. So a proposal to take health insurance away from millions, that's what my opponent would do. He wants to repeal the Affordable Care Act as a non-starter with me. But I do want to improve our health care system. Here's what Medicare X would do. I've written this bill with Michael Bennet from Colorado. We would direct the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare Services to offer an insurance policy on the exchange that anyone could buy if they wanted to. The insurance policy would cover the Obamacare essential health benefits. Medicare doesn't have to collect a profit. Medicare doesn't have to pay taxes. Medicare doesn't have to pay fancy salaries. Medicare doesn't advertise on the evening news. Medicare already has a distribution network in every zip code in the country. If Medicare offered this policy, it would be significantly less expensive than what private insurance would offer. But they would recover a premium for it, so it's not going to increase the deficit or taxes. If you qualify for an Obamacare subsidy, you could use that subsidy to bring the cost down, just as you can with private insurance. But we wouldn't force anybody to buy it. It would be available in every zip code in the United States. I think what Americans need is they need more choices and they need lower cost, and that's what Medicare X would do.
You were governor during the Virginia Tech massacre, so you have a unique perspective on this. After the shootings in Parkland, Florida, and a number of other school shootings, there's been a lot of passionate debate raging about training and arming teachers to keep students safe. The Lee County School Board decided to arm teachers because it can't afford to hire more school resource officers. What do you say to voters there who say, hey, what happens in Northern or Central Virginia may be okay for them, but here, this is what we want. We want to arm our teachers.
I do not tell Lee County School Board or principal how to secure their kids. If they're going to have a strategy that they think that will work for them, I'm not going to tell them otherwise. I know as a mayor of Richmond, with my kids in the Richmond public schools, we put school resources officers in to try to keep kids safe. So there's no one-size-fits-all strategy. But I'll tell you, the area that is so critically important was the painful lesson that I learned on the worst day of my life in April of 2007 at Virginia Tech. A deranged young man who was mentally ill, but whose high school teachers and counselors knew, and his parents knew how to help him succeed with medication and treatment, walked onto a campus where nobody knew anything about him. His mental health declined. He was adjudicated mentally ill and dangerous. Thus, it was illegal for him to have a weapon. But because of weaknesses in the background check system, he was able to buy a weapon he was prohibited from having. And 32 beautiful people, students, faculty, grad students, lost their lives, and many were injured, and families and these injured kids suffered to the day. So the painful lesson that I learned that day through that loss is, hey, there's a solution. You know, if there's universal background checks where every time a gun is sold or transferred, the person who's doing it has to check to make sure that the recipient isn't prohibited from having a weapon, we can reduce these crimes. We'll never eliminate crime. We'll never eliminate gun crime, but that's not the test. The test is, can we reduce crime and keep people safer? If we're unwilling to learn after suffering, if we're unwilling to learn after we watch kids get gunned down in Newtown, or people at a club in Florida, or students in Parkland, or concert goers in Las Vegas, if we're not willing to learn and do something, shame on us. There's answers here that would work, and universal background checks is the one that I think would do the most good.
All right, Senator, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it.
We must take a break right now. When we come back,
Welcome back. Let's get right to our group of Liberty University students and their questions for Senator Kaine. Let's begin with Victoria Turchetta. She is a sophomore from Cranston, Rhode Island. A question about immigration.
Hey, Victoria.
Hi, thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So during your speech in 2013, you were advocating for an immigration framework that is premised on a merit-based point system, showing the world that we are a country of laws and enhancing our border security. You recently have voted against the Stop Dangerous Sanctuary Cities Act, Stop Illegal Reentry Act, and the Stop Sanctuary Policies and Protect Americans Act. It seems that you have turned away from the causes that you had a passion for in 2013. Why is that?
Very good question. I mean, immigration is really, really important. It's in the Declaration of Independence. It's an important part of the system we have. And I continue to support very vigorous immigration reform, including border and public security. So, for example, most recently, I worked with Lindsey Graham to draft a bill that would have permanently protected Dreamers, as President Trump asked us to do, and also would have provided $25 billion in border security for the United States. We put that bill on the floor of the Senate with 8 Democrats and 8 Republicans in February, but the president came out against it. Both halves were things he had campaigned on. He came out against it, and then no other Republicans would join the bill. I tell you what I think the answer is. The answer is comprehensive immigration reform. Like tax reform, we haven't done it since 1986. I was a proud sponsor and voted for a comprehensive bill in 2013 that passed the Senate, but then no action was taken on it in the House. And it was everything. It was border protection, helping employers figure out the status of employees, visa reform, protection for Dreamers, path to citizenship. But the border protection piece was a huge portion of it. We passed it through the Senate. The House didn't act, but it is my hope that the House will act after November, and we'll have an opportunity to put that bill on the president's desk. The security issues are really important, but the other issues, visas, Dreamer protection, are really important too. Thanks for asking that.
Reagan Waits is a first-year law student from Raleigh, North Carolina. Her question is about crime and gang violence.
Is it Reagan or Regan?
Reagan.
Reagan, you bet.
Senator Kaine, in June of this year, 11 MS-13 gang members, 10 of whom were illegal immigrants, were sentenced to life in prison after being charged in the kidnappings and deaths of 2 Virginia teens. What actions will you take in Congress to combat this type of crime? And from your perspective, how does it relate to legal immigration?
Yeah, let me connect it, but first on the crime side. So I've dealt with crime a lot as a mayor and governor. Sadly, when I was elected first to the Richmond City Council, Richmond had the 2nd highest homicide rate in the United States. Tough, tough situation. Over the course of my time in office, we were able to bring down violent crime and homicide by more than 50%. When I was governor, we achieved a recognition that Virginia hadn't achieved for a very long time, if ever. We got Virginia into one of the 10 safest states in the country. Now, we didn't do it by cracking down on immigrants generally. Instead, what we did is we focused our attention on the bad guys. One of the challenges is if there's a general crackdown on immigrants generally, and you get your law enforcement to start to focus on people's immigration status rather than whether they're rapists or murderers or arsonists, you can actually dilute your effort to battle crime. That's why the head of my state police, when I was governor, said, don't make us go be immigration law enforcers. Let us fight against the crimes of the kind that you just mentioned that these MS-13 members perpetrated. So we should always go after bad guys, bad men and women. We should have tough law enforcement against them. But if we wage a big war against immigrants generally, we'll take our eye off the ball and we won't reduce crime. We'll make our cities less safe.
Stuart Martin is a junior from Roanoke, Virginia, studying engineering, has a question about American history.
From the Star City.
Yeah. So, Senator Kaine, seeing that many of our historical monuments are being destroyed, what do you plan to do for the preservation of American history for future generations?
So, great question. And this is an important one, and maybe as important in Virginia as anywhere, because we love our history. And I've had to grapple with this throughout my time in office. I was the mayor of Richmond. And let me tell you what we did when I was a city councilman and mayor in Richmond. We preserved some statues. We put up some new statues to recognize heroes whose voices and stories had never been told. But we also took down, when we had to take down bridges that were obsolete, that were named after Civil War generals, when we put the bridges back up, we named them after civil rights heroes. And one of the reasons we did is that there were so many other buildings and squares and streets in Virginia named after some of the same civil rights heroes, but people who battled for civil rights or equality, their stories weren't even told. So what I learned when I was mayor, and what I continued to do as governor when we inaugurated a civil rights statue on the Capitol grounds in Virginia, what I basically believe is you need to listen to your community, and then you need to make sure that you're telling the full story, not just a part of the story. You know, when Monument Avenue in Richmond was only Civil War generals, 4 years is not the only important thing about Richmond. So we put up a statue of Richmond hero, athlete, scholar, human rights activist Arthur Ashe to say Richmond's got more important and more monumental people than just those between 1861 and 1865. So that's the way I approach these issues.
I know the issue of abortion has come up. Abby Close from Glen Allen, Virginia. Are you here?
Abby's right here.
Abby, there you go.
Yeah.
And she has a question on this topic that I think is valuable.
Hi, thank you for
Hey, Abby.
being here. It has been demonstrated throughout the ongoing judicial appointment procedures that your party clearly has a litmus test against pro-life appointments. So my question is, why should someone who is pro-life vote for you?
I'm gonna skip the litmus test part of it because I don't think that's quite the case. But let me just take your question. I'm a Catholic. My church has a very strict teaching about abortion that it's wrong, and I have lived my church's teaching during my entire adult life. And I encourage every one of you up here, I encourage everyone here, live your faith, live your convictions. That's what I do. But I don't think the job of an elected official is to legislate my Catholic Church's doctrine for everybody to follow, even those who aren't Catholics or have different points of view. So you live your faith, and I've certainly lived mine, but there are an awful lot of people in this country who practice in religions that have a different view about contraception and abortion than the Catholic Church do. And there's a lot of people who don't go to church, but they're moral, thinking, ethical people who have different points of view. I think using the criminal law, as my opponent would like to do, repealing Roe versus Wade, using the criminal law to criminalize, prosecute, and even jail women and doctors for making this decision is exactly the wrong thing to do. I believe that women can make their own moral decisions about their health care, including their reproductive health care.
Your opponent said earlier that you support abortion up until the moment of birth. Your response?
He dramatically misstated a vote that I cast recently. There was a vote on something called the Pain Capable Act that came up before the Senate, I believe, in March. And it would have barred all abortions after the 20th week. He said I was allowing abortion into the 9th month. No, this would have barred all abortions after the 20th week. Many courts have considered that exact law and found that law unconstitutional. Many courts, state courts, federal courts have said that violates Roe versus Wade and the Casey decision which came after. I take an oath, the oath that I take, that we all take in public office. I swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States. I don't swear to a president. I don't swear to a flag. I uphold the Constitution of the United States. And that bill that was before us had been ruled unconstitutional by virtually every court that had taken it up.
I want to get one more in real quickly. We're short on time. Tim Johnson, Woodbridge.
Hey,
Tim, question about opioids.
Woodbridge is well represented. I know there was another Woodbridge there earlier.
Deaths involving synthetic opioids, such as fentanyl, increased 847% nationally between 2013 and 2017. What will you do to address the opioid epidemic?
Fantastic question, and this affects every state, every zip code, every community. I'm really proud that 2 days ago, we passed out of the Senate, I think the vote was 99-1, an opioid response act that I played a significant portion in writing. It came out of two committees, the Health Committee where I sit and the Finance Committee where Senator Warner sits. And it was a whole set of strategies, around research, prevention, treatment, interdicting fentanyl. We've got to tackle this problem, and in a bipartisan way, we've gotten this bill done, and I think it'll get to the president's desk, and I am confident he'll sign it.
All right, thank you so much. That wraps up. How about a hand real quickly for our students asking some great questions? Senator Kaine, we will go right into your closing statements. You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you again for inviting us tonight and pairing with Hampton, for I know it'll be a great discussion in a couple of weeks. I started my time as a public servant when I took a year off in law school to go work with Jesuit missionaries in Honduras, teaching kids to be carpenters and welders. Since then, I've been a civil rights attorney, I've been a teacher at the University of Richmond, and now for over 20 years I've been honored to represent my city, my Commonwealth, and my country. My campaign is about what my life has been about, a Virginia that works for all. It's about Virginia, solving Virginia problems and bringing Virginia solutions to the forefront, because we have a lot of good of them. It's about work, the dignity of working people, fair wages, a fair tax code, skills training, immigration reform. But finally, it's about those last two words in the Pledge of Allegiance, for all. We need people who will stand up for all these days. We don't have to accept a politics that's for a few, for some, or for me. We don't have to accept divisiveness or bitterness or anger. We need people who will stand up for those last two words in the Pledge of Allegiance. That's what I've done, and that's what I'm going to do if I have the honor to be reelected. Thank you.
Senator Kaine. Thank you. Thank you very much for taking the time to have us tonight. Thank you. Senator Kaine, everybody. All right. Good to be with you guys. Thank you, Mark. We'll send you out that door there. Thank you.